Hi there, Hetties fans. It's Sam here from Hettie's Crafty Creations. Thank you very much for purchasing one of our Funky Fleece Hat Kits. If you've not already purchased one, or you'd like to get another one, or order some slightly different designs, please visit www.hettiescraftycreations.com, where you'll find a range of our Funky Fleece hats along with all of our other lovely kits and products. So this YouTube tutorial video is designed to help the beginners and the slightly less experienced sewers. And for those of you who've not sewn with fleece before, we're going to take you through the contents of the kit, how to work with the pattern, get that onto the fabric, cutting it out and sewing it all the way through to the final finished product. Now, you can always use the titles and skip ahead, so if there's bits that I'm covering that you already know, feel free to skip on to the bit that you want to have a look at, and you can always return to the video at any time. So I'm going to get going in a second, so thank you very much again, and hopefully you will enjoy this tutorial. In the kit, you're going to get the fabric, the pattern, and an instruction booklet, but you're also going to need to provide some items of your own. One of them is going to be a sewing machine. It doesn't have to be a fancy sewing machine as long as it does a straight stitch. That's all that's called for in this pattern. So to complete the project, you don't need any fancy stitches. You're going to need a pair of normal scissors for cutting the pattern out, and you're going to need some fabric scissors and or a rotary cutter. I prefer using a rotary cutter, but once you've sewn the pattern together, you're going to need some fabric scissors to be able to cut off the seam allowances. However you choose to mark out your pattern, that's up to you. You could use tailor's chalk, you could use tailor's pencil. Personally, I use one of these, which is a little chalk liner, and you'll see that in use a little bit later on, but that's what I'm going to be using. So I'm going to get rid of these. And you're also going to need some glass head pins. Now, as I go through, you'll see where I use them. You might need them for pinning your pattern. You might want to use weights or clips, but you will need the glass head pins to hold it together whilst you're sewing. So I'll move these out of the way and I will show you what you get in the kit. So depending on the colour of the kit that you've chosen, you'll get a large piece of fleece, which is for the body of the hat and the headband, and then you'll get the 2 or 3 smaller pieces, which are for the spikes that are going to be added on later on. You also get this little instruction booklet, which has got clear pictures and descriptions explaining how to make the pattern, and you will also get pattern sheet. So if you're just going for the plain hat, then you'll get just the one pattern sheet. If you're going for the hat with the tail on it, then you will also get a second sheet which has the tail pattern on it as well. In the kit, you will get one of these pattern sheets. There's only 3 parts to the Funky Fleece hat. That is part A, which is the hat headband, B, which is the hat top piece, and C, which are for the spikes. If you've ordered the one with the tail, then you will get a separate pattern piece for that. Now, there are 4 sizes and they're all on the same pattern. So you have the adult 23-inch, you've got the child large 21-inch, medium child 20-inch, and the small child, which is 19 inches. So you will need to measure the head of the person that you're going to be making this hat for to make sure that you choose the right size. Now, when you look at the pattern, you will see that you've got hat headband A. Now we've got 4 different sizes all within the same pattern. So if you've gone for the adult size, then you're going to be cutting around the outside of the pattern. If you're going for the large child, then it's the next line in, and so on and so on. The notch is in the same position on each of the pattern pieces, and we're going to be cutting 2 of the hat headbands. The hat top piece, again, you've got 4 different sizes: adult, child, large, medium and small, and the lines are respective. You're going to be cutting 4 of those. With the spikes, there's 10 in the normal hat and 14 in the hat with a tail, and they're all the same size whether it's a child or an adult hat. You're then going to cut out the pattern pieces. Now, if you are likely to need to make more than one hat in different sizes, then you're perfectly at liberty to photocopy this, and then you can cut out in the different sizes. If you're going to be making multiples of them, I would recommend cutting them out in cardboard and then marking around them, which is what I do. But for the purposes of this, I'm going to show you with the paper. So once you've cut out your pattern pieces, you will end up with 3 pieces that look like this. So those are our 3 pieces for the hat. We've got A, B and C there. And I'm going to go on to the fabric, which is Polar Fleece, and I'm going to show you how that works. In the kit, depending on which design you've gone for, you will either get 3 or 4 pieces of fleece. You'll get 1 large piece, that's for the body and the headband of the hat. And if you've also gone for the one with the tail, you'll get that out of the same piece of fabric as well. And then you'll have either 2 or 3 of the smaller pieces, and that's for the spikes. Now, with this Polar Fleece, when you unfold it, you'll find that it's already been folded in half. You've got 2 curled edges. Now, this fleece has a stretch, and it stretches from the rolled edges. So as it is now, our stretch direction is that way, not top to bottom. Although there is some play top to bottom, the actual stretch direction is from left to right. And on our hat pattern piece A, there is a arrow there which tells you what the stretch direction is. You'll see it on your pattern. So when we lay it, we have to lay the stretch direction from left to right. Now, the Polar Fleece has got 2 edges. You can maybe see there. This is the fluffier side. Now, this is the side I like to have on the outside, so I call this the right side for the purpose of this tutorial. And then on the inside, you can see it's a lot smoother. It doesn't have such a big pile. I'm going to call that the wrong sides. Now, we need to open this all the way out. There's my middle line. I'm going to take the left-hand side, bring it over to the center. You can see the curled edges there. Line those up with the center. Get my fabric nice and straight along the bottom edge, and just gently push out any wrinkles or lumps. Do again the same from the right hand side, bringing the 2 curled edges to the middle. So what we've now got is a piece that's the same width, but with our 2 machine edges in the center. Now, stretch direction is left to right. We're going to take our pattern piece A and we're going to place it at the bottom edge, leaving about 1.5 centimeters up from the bottom, just to make sure that when we cut it, we're cutting through both layers of fabric, because we're going to cut 2 together. We're also going to cut out hat pieces B, and it doesn't matter what the stretch direction you use for B is, they're both going to come out of this left-hand side piece. We're then going to flip this over, cut that on the right-hand side, and if you've got the hat with a tail, then this is the other pattern piece, and that will fit out of that section there. So you have got enough to do the tail hat as well. So On the bottom here on your pattern you have a notch, and I will show you how to get that notch marked up onto your design. Now at the left hand edge of this, as you're looking at it, you have the fold line, so we're going to line that right up to the fold on our left hand edge, and then up to you how you do it, whether you want to pin, weight or clip. I'm going to pin this pattern through both pieces of fabric. Do the same again on this side, pinning through both pieces of fabric. Now this is where your preference comes in. If you're confident enough to cut it straight from the pattern, then you're more than welcome to do so. If you want to pin it and mark it, you can either use the tailor's chalk, the pencils. I'm going to be using this little roller. It's got some chalk inside it, and as I roll it round, it just lays a little chalk line out for me. So I'm going to go all the way around the outside. I'm just going to put a little mark there where my notch is, and then when I unpin this, and take that mark up into the piece of fabric there. So that's my notch there. Now I'm going to flip this over 180 degrees so it's completely the opposite way round, and I'm going to line the right hand edge, which is a fold edge on the pattern, as far over to the right as we can get it, so it's touching the fold on the right hand side. I'm going to pin my pattern down again, pinning it through both pieces. Now to get the notch mark in the right place on the right hand side, I'm going to turn this over, line my edges up, and you see the notch mark is there. I'm just going to make my little notch mark there. So I've got my notches there, and both of these pieces are A. I'm going to mark them up as A, just so that I don't forget later on. I'm going to mark these all up together at the same time, just because I find it easier to cut them all at once. I'm going to be using my cardboard stencil, just because I find it quicker and easier that you be pinning yours in place. So I'm going around the outside of this one. Now the stretch direction does not matter with the top pieces, so you can lay it in whichever orientation you want to. It will allow you to get these two pieces on this right hand side. So there's my two B pieces, there's my two A pieces, and if I was doing the dragon tail, then I'd be able to get that out of that piece there as well. So with all of our pieces marked up, we've got our two A's and our two B's. I'm going to cut them, and I'm going to use a rotary cutter for this. So there I've got now my two B pieces. I've got an A piece, and then I'm going to cut my other A piece here. Now where I've put my little marker there, I'm going to cut a very small notch, Only needs to be about 3mm. So there's my notch there. Same on this side. And this will just help us line up our pieces when we come to assemble at the end. Now we're ready to put our A pieces together. So we're going to open up. And there's our hat. Now this is the right side that I've written on here. So I'm going to put my right sides together. So I'm going to put A over the top of A. I'm going to line up my pieces. I'm going to make sure that my notches at the bottom are lined up in the right position. Now, just going to need to just keep tweaking it until you get the pattern as close together as possible. And our first bit of sewing is going to be along this curved edge here. So we don't need to pin this bottom edge, just need to pin this curved edge. So I'm going to take some glass-headed pins. Now, there's probably going to be people watching this that are going to shout at me for the way that I pin and sew. But I'm going to pin and sew with my pins out to that edge. Again, it's entirely up to you how you do it. If you're happy going left to right with your pins like that, then feel free to do it that way. This is the way that I do it. So I'm going with a pin at the point of each of these ear flaps, one at each end, one in the middle as a minimum, and then it's up to you however many more you want to put in so that you feel comfortable when you're sewing it that these two pieces aren't going to move apart. The only stitch we need to worry about using when making this hat is the straight stitch. I've chosen the straight stitch with the needle in the center position. The reason for that is I know with it in the center position, if I go to my first notch on my plate next to my presser foot, if I go to the first mark, which is there, that will give me the 1 centimeter seam allowance, which we've allowed for on all of our pattern pieces. The cotton I'm using on this is white. You can colour match your cotton. It doesn't have to be colour matched. The fleece is very forgiving. You won't be able to see the stitches once the piece has been done. So if I just zoom out a smidge there, you should be able to see what I'm doing as I sew through. Now I'm going to do a starting stitch just to make sure it's nice and locked. Drop my presser foot down. I'm going to keep my edge in line with the guide on here, which gives me my 1 centimeter seam allowance. Now this is the point where seasoned sewers are going to be going, oh, you're going to sew straight over your needles. It's just the way that straight over your pins, sorry. It's just the way that I do it. If you want to, you can remove the pins as you come along. I just sew straight through with mine. So there's our starting stitch. Take it nice and slowly. Make sure you get this curve edge 1 centimeter all the way around. If your two pieces of fabric are slightly apart, so I've got one that's slightly shorter than the other as we're going through this. So you see it there. I've got the top piece is slightly smaller than the bottom piece. I'm keeping it 1 centimeter on the bottom piece, so I'm always keeping one of the pieces of fabric on the centimeter line there. And then there's my little back stitch just to finish it off. So there you can see it's my seam all the way around the edge. Now, with all the pins removed, it's time to use our scissors to cut off our seam allowance. This Polar Fleece is very forgiving. We can cut as close to that seam as we can. I'm not sure if you can see how close that is there, but I'm about 2 millimeters away from the seam that I've just sewn. The more of this you can get away when you're cutting off, the smoother, the flatter your hat will be when we turn it inside out. Remember, take your time with this. The last thing you want to do is slip and cut through your stitching. But as I say, the closer you can get to that seam, the neater it's going to be. So you can see there just how close to that seam I've cut. So this piece now becomes a 1. Open it out so that my right sides are up, wrong sides are on the table. I'm going to bring it across so that my right sides are together. Line my notches up, and I'm going to pin this edge, the 2 open edges together, making sure that my seams on both sides line up perfectly. My notches are lined up, top and bottom, and we're going to go 1 centimeter seam allowance again. Starting stitch, back stitch, just to finish it off, and we're going to cut off this excess seam allowance. Again, take your time, and we're going to go as neat and as close to that stitch seam line as we can. I'm going to turn the whole thing inside out, and there is our headband. So that's that bit complete. Just roll the edges. This is where cutting all of that excess seam allowance off gives us a really good, neat edge. Don't need to do it. Now that we've sewn the hat headband together, the next stage is the 2 top hat pieces, so both of my B pieces. Now what we need to do is put the right sides together. So there are my right sides on that piece. Do the same on this one. So my right sides are together. I'm going to take my pins and I'm going to pin on the left hand curved edge. Ensure that the top point is lined up. With both of my B pieces now pinned together, it's time to stitch them. I'm going to stitch them along the left hand curved edge on both sides. Into the sewing machine then, back on a 2.5 centimeter running stitch. Press a foot down. Going to do a start stitch with a 1 centimeter seam allowance all the way along. Same again with the other piece. We can take our pins out now. Time to cut off our seam allowance as close to that seam as we can get without cutting through the actual stitching. Same on the other one. So this one becomes B1 and B2. The next stage then is to make the hat spikes, and I'm using pattern piece C for this. It doesn't matter which size hat you're making, it's the same size template. I'm using the cardboard one here, but you would use the one that you've cut out from your pattern. You can pin, but I'm going to do mine with my chalk roller. I'm going to place my pattern piece on the fabric. Now we're going to be making 5 spikes. We're going to do 3 in one colour, and we're going to make 2 in the second colour. So for this hat, I'm going to make 3 yellow and 2 red. Because I've doubled the fabric over, all I need to do is do 3 of the red, of the yellow, and 2 of the red, and then I'm going to cut it out with my rotary cutter and show you the next step. Don't throw away your excess pieces. You may find them handy for future projects. Now I've got my 5 my hat spikes. I'm going to make sure that they are right sides together, and I'm going to pin them. We're only going to sew along 2 edges of these. So we have all 5 pieces now pinned. We're only going to sew on the curved edges of these. We're going to leave the bottom edge open, line it up under our presser foot onto the 1 centimetre seam stitching guide. We're going to do a starting stitch. When we get to the top, we'll leave the needle down, lift the presser foot up, back down, and then we're going to carry on with our 1 centimetre of seam allowance down to the bottom before we get to the edge of the fabric. A little back stitch just to secure it. With all of my spikes now stitched and pins taken out, I'm just finishing off cutting the seam allowance away from each one of these. So again, as close to the stitching as you can, flat across the point, and then back down the other curved side. And these are ready to be turned the right way round. Just roll the tip till you get the spike. And there we have our 5 spikes. So our order is going to be yellow, red, yellow, red, yellow. And the next stage then is to position these onto our pieces B1, B2. B1, we're going to open it out so that we have the right sides up, and along this unstitched curved edge where we're going to place our spikes. Now, doesn't matter at the moment which piece is which. When we stitch them together, the edge that has the 3 spikes will become the back. So we're placing these right sides and right sides together. So this would become the back, and this would be the front. Our pieces are lined up, all of the points facing into the middle seam there. We're going to pin them in place. Now we don't want to come too far down on the front, otherwise the first spike will be right at the front of the forehead. So we want to get our two middle spikes, the red and the yellow, nice and close to our seam. And I just pin them in place like this. Now if you want a smaller spike, I'll zoom in there. If you want a smaller spike, I'll show you here. At the moment I'm lining mine up just with the edge. If you want the spikes a little bit smaller, you can just overhang them a little bit, and then that excess will be cut off and when we cut the seam allowance off later. But as this is an adult hat, I want the spikes to be fairly decent size. So make sure that your seams are on either edge. They're not slightly rolled over, otherwise your spikes will look a bit uneven. There we go, like that. I'm going to pin each spike in place here. Try not to get too close on this bottom edge here. This will be the seam where our hat band joins onto the hat top. Get too close, then we will catch that later on when we stitch the two pieces together. Open out B2, place that over the top, right sides to right sides. Well, this is where I need to make sure that I align my seams at the peak, and then I just pin the seams in place. One pin there. My next pin will be to make sure that the corners are in place. This corner here, and then a few pins along the edge in between where my spikes are. Make sure that all of our spikes are well in position, and then it's back to the sewing machine. And one long running stitch all the way along this edge. We're going to take this nice and slow, because as we get up to each of the spikes, the sewing machine is going to be going through 4 layers of fabric. Starting stitch, foot down, if you need to, just stretch out the spikes to make sure that you're not stitching them up with a crease in them as it goes through under the foot. And as we get to the end, just do a little back stitch, and there we go. So that has now sealed in all of our spikes. We can take the pins out on the outside. Don't forget, we've still got pins on the inside, so we will need to open that up. Take those out. So as we turn it back through, taking those pins out, and there we have our spikes. So that's our front, and there's our back. Now we've got our hat piece sewn together with our spikes in, we need to get rid of this seam allowance. So we're going to carefully cut along our seam, making sure that we don't catch any of the fabric on the underside as well. Now we can always just trim this each time, taking off a little bit more if you're a little bit nervous about this part. So as you can see, I've gone quite close on this side, left quite a bit on this side, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to trim it from the other direction. That then allows me to cut my seam off nice and close. You can just trim off any bits where it's a bit too big. I'm going to do a little bit more trimming on this bottom edge here. And there we have it. One nice and neat trimmed seam allowance. The next stage in the process is taking the hat piece, the top hat piece and the headband, and attaching them together. We're going to do that by using our notches and our seams. The back of the headband is the part with the seam in it, so that is going to line up with the seam on the back of our top hat piece. The two side seams, those are the two sides without the spikes, they're going to line up with our two notches. Make sure that our back seams are both together and line those up with our hat back seam there. So we've got all three seams in position, and pin it in place. And we go round to the side of the hat at the ear flaps, and we have our two notches on the front and the back piece, or the inside and the outside piece. We're going to line that notch up with our side seam and pin it in place. And go round to the other side with the other notch and the other side seam. We're going to line those two notches and the side seam, pin it all in place. Then we're going to take the front section and we're going to stretch our hat band, find our center point, and we're going to pin it in place. So we have our 4 pins holding our notches and our side seams, our back seam, notches in the other side seam, and then the front. Now you may have a little bit of excess material here, and you can see that the headband and the top hat don't quite match up. So if we lift the top hat piece, so we've got a little bit more sticking out beyond our hat band, so I'm going to lift it by about 1/2 centimetre, so we're going to take away some of that excess fabric, still keeping our seams and our notches lined up. So now you can see that we have a little bit of the excess fabric from the top piece, slightly higher, all the way around our hat. And that stops us having quite such a baggy top of our hat once it's all sewn together. What I like to do now is stretch each quarter so that the fabric is flat, and then just pin in the middle of each quarter. So we've got a slight bagging there. I just stretch it ever so slightly, make sure my seams there are lined up and my raw edges are lined up on the headband, and then pin it in place. I have one each quarter and then one in between each quarter. You can see there that it's fairly even all the way around. Now it's time to do some more sewing. For this bit of sewing, because it's quite bulky and I'm trying to get this to fit around my sewing machine, if you have the option, then I remove my little accessory drawer and just do it around this small part. I'm going to start my stitching at the back seam. Now you may need to lift your presser foot to its fullest height to get that to go under that bit there. And what we're looking to do here is our 1 centimetre seam allowance is going to be taken from the hat band, not the hat there. So we're going to pinch 1 centimetre of the hat band in along there, and this will all be excess. No need to rush, take your time, make sure you're getting all of the fabric in nice and neat. When you get to the notches and the seams, make sure your notches and your seams line up. When you get to the spikes, just make sure they're tucked out of the way so you're not going to catch them as you go round. Getting to another notch, just make sure that your notch and your seam are still lined up. And we're back round to the beginning. I'm just going to go over this last seam, do my locking off stitch. With the hat headband and the hat top piece all sewn together, now all that's left to do is to remove the excess seam allowance around the two parts. Again, we're going to have to do this carefully. You'll probably find it easier to cut in both directions to make sure that you cut off all of that seam allowance. So I'm going from this side here, cutting as close to the seam as possible, and then I'm going to go from the other side, making sure that I don't cut into that seam, but you can see how close I've got there. Cut that excess off, and we're going to go all the way around the hat, remove all of the seam allowance, and there we go, with all of our excess seam allowance trimmed back. Our hat is ready to turn the right way round, and there you have it, one Hettie's Crafty Creations Funky Fleece hat. Thank you very much for watching. Got any questions, anything that we can help you with, please send us a message through Facebook or our website www.hettiescraftycreations.com. So there you go, Hettie fans. That is how to make one of our Funky Fleece hats. If you've got any questions or if you have any problems whilst you're making it, please feel free to contact us either through Facebook or through our website at www.hettiescraftycreations.com. Thank you very much, guys, and hopefully I'll see you again on another one of our tutorials. If you're making the tail hat, then you need to cut out 2 of the D pattern pieces, and that's done off of the main body of the fabric. We've got a long edge here, which is A, and we've got a shorter curve here, which is B. And this is important to remember which one's which when we're placing our spikes. I've cut out 5 of my I've cut out 6 of my spike pattern pieces, sewn them together, and they're now ready to place on our pattern piece. Now I'm going to separate my 2 sides. So I now have my right sides upwards, my wrong sides are on the board. And I'm going to place my spikes onto my pattern piece D. And I'm going to start at the bottom edge here with yellow spike. Then I'm going red, green, yellow, and red. Now we don't want to sew too close to this tip here, because this is going to include the seam allowance where we sew it into our hat top pieces. And we don't want to go too close to this bottom edge, because it's going to be quite difficult to get it all to fit in. I'm just going to shuffle these pieces until I got them where I want them, with a little gap in between, and then I'm going to pin them in place. With those all pinned in place where I want them, I'm going to take the other pattern piece D, I'm going to place it over the top, line up my corners at the point there and at my point there. Now I'm going to pin the 2 pieces together, starting at the end of the tail here, making sure that that's lined up where I want it. Pin this bottom corner and then pin this top corner here. Next I'm going to pin in between each of my spikes just to hold the pattern pieces together when I'm sewing. And there we have our 2 pattern pieces all pinned in place with all of the spikes in the center. The next step is to run it through the sewing machine, 1 centimeter seam allowance again. Into the sewing machine then, press a foot down, still stitching with a straight stitch. And there we have the first stitch on there done. Now we can take all of our pins out. Open up to the right side, take our pins out of our spikes and remove our excess seam allowance. Again, remembering we go as close as we can to our stitching. That just gives us less bulk in the finished item. With all of our excess cut off from the long curve on our tail piece, we now come to one of the trickiest parts. That's going to be stitching along this short curve. Now, because we've got the spikes already in place, we're going to have to make sure that we tuck these well out of the way. So I'm just rolling that one right up so that I don't catch it Same with the next one along. I'm going to roll it right up just to make sure I don't catch it when I'm stitching my bottom seam. And I'm going to pin that in place to make sure that it doesn't unroll whilst I'm doing my sewing. Then I'm going to pin all the way along the rest of this edge here, and then we're going to run it through with the machine. Taking that pin out, and I'm going to use with my fingers, just make sure that we're not going to catch that first spike. Remove any of the rest of the pins, and then we're going to take off the remainder of any excess seam allowance. With both those two curved edges stitched, now we need to turn it the right way round. I like to use the spikes to help me here. So as I get to the next one, pulling on that spike just helps to pull that through. And we get down to this last one, the yellow one. And then we're just going to need to roll. Sometimes you might find it easy to get like a pair of scissors or a chopstick just to push through that last little bit of the tail. There we go. There's our tail with our spikes. The next stage is to attach our B1 piece, a B2 piece, and our tail piece together to make the completed top of our hat. We're going to open up B1 so we have our right sides together. Place our green spike flat on this edge here. This is going to become the front of our hat. We're going to place that there. Pin it in place as close to the center seam as we can. Then our yellow spike going to go right next to the green one. Pin that in place. Having pinned the two spikes onto the front half of pattern piece B2, you need to attach the tail. Now we've got a curved edge going that way. We need to make that marry up with this curved edge here going in the opposite direction. Place the bottom edge of the shorter curved piece on our tail about 2.5 centimeters up from the bottom edge of the hat. We're going to pin the tail piece onto the top of the hat piece, and as we bring it round, we're just going to tease the fabric into position so that our curved edges align together. At this top edge, just allow your excess pointed piece of the tail come off of the top edge. That will get trapped in with our seam when we attach part B2. I'm going to place that over the top like this, lining up our seams in the middle at the bottom and our seam at the top here. So there's our two seam points married up together there. That's where I'm going to place my first pin on my top half to keep those two seams together. And then we work backwards, line up our bottom corners there, pin in place. I'm going to make sure my two spikes are laid flat and pin in between the two spikes to hold this side together. And I'm going to do the same on this side, marrying up my two bottom points. And it's worth taking the time to get this pinned well, so when it goes through the machine we don't get any puckering. And now I'm going to pin through in a couple of places along the back edge as we do this, just making sure that our 4 pieces of fabric which we've got here now are all lined edge to edge. And I think one more about here. Just be patient, trying to get pinned through 4 layers of fabric. So there we have it all pinned together. As I sew through, I'm going to make sure that these spikes are laid flat. If you want, you can just put another pin in to keep those spikes in place. And then we're back to the sewing machine. Take it nice and slow. We're going through 4 layers of fabric at various parts of this. We're still going with our straight stitch, 1 centimetre seam allowance. When you get to one of the spikes, just help the fabric through till it's all the way under the presser foot. Feed all that fabric through. So now we can take out all of our pins, starting from the outside. Fold that over, and there we will find our pins holding our tail piece. And our front 2 spikes. And now we can start to trim away our excess on our seam allowance there. And you find that you have to start trimming bits away. And once you've done one bit, come back and trim from the other side, because we have got quite a bit of fleece fabric here. With all of our excess seam allowance cut off the back of our hat, we turn it in the right way round, and there we have the tail piece and the 2 front spikes. And to assemble the whole hat together, we do it exactly the same as we did with the hat without the tail piece in.